Talking baseball, baseball and the O's.
Welcome back, Birdland, to another episode of the Talkin Orioles Baseball Podcast. I am your host, Benny Becker. So excited to be here with you, gang, and we have a tremendous episode on our hands today. We're going to get through the very end of spring training. It's officially over. The season is just hours away, it feels like. Really a couple days away, but truly that's just a matter of a couple hours, gang. So we are so excited. We're going to break down ultimately what happened over spring training. We're going to talk Jackson Holliday. We're going to talk about camp cuts and some of the guys that did not break camp with this team. Then we're going to talk about kind of what the roster looks like now that opening day is essentially upon us. And then we're going to talk about guys like Colton Cowser, Bradish, Means, update you on those two injuries, Gunnar Henderson and his set position this year. And we have to talk also about the passing of Peter Angelos at some point, which is unfortunate and sad, and we will get to all of that, gang. But we have a tremendous episode on our hands. Like I said, spring training is done, gang. The games are over, the camps are out, and basically everybody's making their way up north to Baltimore to start this season on Thursday against the Angels when real games begin. Gosh, I'm excited, truly. And when you look at what the Orioles did this spring training, it's amazing, gang. Listen, all of spring training, I was saying I'm not going to overreact to spring training. I'm not going to overreact to no matter whether they were good or bad or individual results. You know, even when we were breaking down these games, we only got so in-depth with it. When the season comes and these games are real, we're going to break down a lot of these situations and at-bats and moments a lot more than we did this spring training. But I kept you up to date on all the stats, the box scores, kind of the prospects and the veterans that, you know, were trying to get it going this spring. And some really did. And some, I wouldn't say struggled. I don't think anybody truly had a horrible spring training camp. Maybe one or two guys that were very fringe at best. And we'll get to that. But ultimately, we saw a lot of good things this spring. And it showed in the standings. Again, the standings don't really mean anything. I remember I was reading Brandon Hyde was talking about, and it's obvious, like we start 0-0 after spring training, just like everybody else. So ultimately, it's not that big of a deal. He's seen very, very successful and good teams struggle and be below 500 in spring training. And you see that all over the league. But we touched last episode about how not only were the Orioles at the top, but the other top team was the Dodgers. And then you had a bunch of teams that kind of might be more bottom dwellers in the regular season who were succeeding in spring training. And I said, don't get too encouraged by the fact that the Orioles are up there at the top, but be encouraged by it because the cream always rises to the top. So the idea that the Orioles and Dodgers, let's say, are the best teams in baseball, it showed this spring. And I think that's probably accurate in the Orioles and Dodgers being the two best overall teams in the entire baseball league. Okay, but when we look at the record, okay, again, I don't want to make too much of it, but it's exciting, gang. They finished MLB best 23-6-2 in spring training. Okay, had the best run differential of plus 58 in those games. Okay, in those 31 games, I believe. And it was the first time ever, not just in my lifetime, ever, that the Orioles won 23 games in spring training. This is a historic team for us. And I think it started in spring training, and I don't think it's stopping in the regular season or the postseason. This is a historic Baltimore Orioles team that we have on our hands, gang. And the proof is in the pudding. This pudding might not count yet. It might be the practice pudding. But the proof is still there, gang. And it's exciting to see. And maybe the most optimistic or the best thing out of spring training that came was the health of the team. I know a couple guys dealt with injuries here and there. Let's put Bradish and Means aside, because we'll get some updates on them later. But let's put those two aside, because that was essentially even before camp began. That was day one physicals that reported those problems. And frankly, I don't even think Means was a problem. Again, I don't want to get too in-depth yet on those two, because we will touch on it, right? But outside of those two names, you had Cedric Mullins pull his hammy, but then came back looking great. So no real worry there. I know James McCann dealt with a little something. Ryan Mountcastle dealt with a little something. There was definitely another name, maybe Austin Hayes, I think was the name, that they all dealt with very, very minor injuries. But nothing that's going to keep them off the team on opening day. Nothing that's going to hinder them moving forward. And really nothing to be concerned of. I mean, we're talking about like a stiff back for James McCann and a stiff neck for Ryan Mountcastle. These are things that, I mean, if that's as bad as injury news as you get during spring training, it's a blessing. And it's a blessing for these Orioles to be able to go into the season completely healthy. Because for a second or two there, it looked like maybe some of those guys might have to hit the 10-day DL, miss opening day. And while that would have created other roster spots for having some of these guys break camp that maybe didn't, ultimately, I think it's best for the Orioles to be able to begin their season essentially where they are, which is pretty much fully healthy. Outside of those two starting pitchers, fully healthy. And really only one of those starting pitchers we're relying on to be a major force for us this season, even if both those pitchers we're hoping and optimistic can be big pieces for this team this season. Okay? So I'm not even going to touch on the games in between our last episode and this, because it's over. It's over, gang. And frankly, I really want to, because there are some really good results in there. There are some really fun games that have cool moments to talk about, a lot of home runs, some big at-bats, especially that last game. It was great seeing a guy like Adley go yard again. There were a couple other really cool ones to see in that game. But overall, it was an unbelievable spring training. And then maybe the thing I'm second most encouraged about coming out of spring is the depth of talent on this roster. It's immense. In fact, I almost will go to say it's unmatched throughout the rest of baseball. Now, some people might call me crazy, and I'm certainly not an expert on every team in the league. I view myself as being very knowledgeable on baseball in all aspects, and I tend, once the season gets going, to watch a lot of random games, whether it's like a Rockies-Padres game or a Rangers-Royals game or whatever it may be. I don't even care about the matchups. You know, I love baseball. So I love watching baseball. And when the Orioles are done that day, and I've watched the Orioles, or if I'm waiting for the Orioles, if it's a late game, or hell, maybe they have an off day and they're not even playing that day. It's just one of these things where I'm not going to stop watching baseball because of that. So my knowledge on these teams grows throughout the season is essentially what I'm trying to say. So coming out of spring, I might not know the depth on every single roster. I might not understand it. But when it comes to these Orioles, I understand it immensely. I truly believe that these Orioles are as deep as they come, and most likely the deepest major league team. And you saw that in the guys that didn't break camp with the team, the guys that got released, the guys that got designated for assignment. And we'll touch on all those guys, right? The first of which, though, I want to talk about is Jackson Holliday. And I've been on here for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever it's been, screaming, ranting, raving, and almost guaranteeing, if not actually guaranteeing, Jackson Holliday on this team. In fact, one of our most recent episodes, I'm almost positive I guaranteed Jackson Holliday would be on this opening day roster. And first, before I get into the reasoning behind the Orioles bringing him down, let me just convey my disappointment. Okay? In a selfish manner, I'm disappointed because I wanted to be there for his first major league game. And I'm going to opening day. I've told you that multiple times, and I will be there, assuming it doesn't get rained out on Thursday, and I think they'll find a way to get it in. I wanted to be there and watch Jackson Holliday take his first Major League at-bats, get his first start. Because if he was on the team, he was starting that day. Even though they're playing a lefty on day one, I think he would have started that day. And I'm disappointed, frankly. But, listen, it's all selfish reasons that I'm truly, really disappointed. Because as talented as he is and as big of a piece of this overall core that they're building for the future as he is, and truly, I think a big piece this year he will be, we don't need him day one. The Orioles don't need him day one because this is a talented roster. I've talked about Urias and Mateo being the backup infielders. And I've talked very highly of both of them and how they both have a piece on this team that could wind up being one of the X factors to win them a World Series. Because the role players in baseball play just as significant as a role usually as the stars, especially when we're talking batters, because you can't manufacture opportunities in baseball. The lineup and the opportunities are going to fall as they do. Sometimes the top and middle of your lineup get the guys on base. Sometimes the bottom of your lineup is coming up with the guys on base or need to start that rally in the ninth. So Urias and Mateo are more than functional, being bigger pieces for this infield and for this ball club in the early stages. So we don't need Jackson Holliday up day one, right? And I think the number one concerning thing when the Orioles looked about bringing Jackson up is his strikeout to walk ratio, okay? It was atrocious. It was. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but it was bad, okay? I know he struck out 15 times this spring, 9 of which were to lefties. And that's the secondary point, that he doesn't have an overwhelming amount of experience against major league quality lefties. Well, obviously starting him in the majors would have gotten him that experience, because if he's in the majors facing a lefty, by definition, it's a major league quality lefty, right? Now, you could ramble about, oh, well, if a guy's WAR is there, then he actually is. If he's in the majors, he's major league quality. Let's just agree on that point, okay? So his strikeout to walk ratio was a red flag that I think they were concerned with. Despite the fact that he had a very good spring, I still don't believe they weren't at least slightly concerned by the strikeout to walk ratio, because this is something that Holliday has never struggled with at any level, including last year. Each time he made a jump was never at least this much of a concern. And this spring was overwhelming. Personally, I think he maybe was a little too excited to try and prove why he should make the team, not be as patient at the plate, kind of go free swinging. And we saw great results again. We saw great results. But the idea that he's only played 18 AAA games at this point, he's a young kid. I don't even think he can drink yet. 20 years old, I believe. So let the kid get a little more seasoning. It doesn't hurt to make sure he can play 5, 6, 7 games a week at second base in the minors. Because that's another aspect to this, is that he is changing positions to second base, right? It's something he really hasn't done much for them. In fact, didn't do even a ton the last year or two. Basically, even though the Orioles saw this coming, right? They didn't necessarily get him those second base opportunities. The Orioles need to see more reps from him at second base, despite the fact that he didn't make any errors this spring at second. He looked relatively good and comfortable. It's just, you want to see a little more from it, right? And I understand that. Get him more seasoning, get him more experience, let him work out some of those kinks in the minors more. Not that I don't think he would have been successful in the majors. I really do. And we talked about the idea that he's the type that learns off of his mistakes very quickly. The quote from Brandon Hyde was that he's a quick study, because it's just one of these things where if he struggles with something for a week or two, odds are he's going to correct it very quickly. And he's going to find ways to be successful. If his swing's getting a little long, he'll work it back to being a little quicker to the ball. If he's getting a little power happy, he'll adjust more to slapping it a little and using that speed to get on. And so we see that. And I think that's a balancing act that he's going to figure out over time. So let him start figuring it out a little more in the minors. Let him go to AAA, and if he dominates, heck, even if he puts up these numbers he did this spring, even with the strikeout to walk ratio, assuming he's playing a solid second base for them, he's going to be up in Baltimore sooner rather than later. Because ultimately, he will be up this season. Absolute worst case, he will be up when the rosters expand. And none of us want to wait that long. I'm cringing saying that right now. But I would put that at like a 1% chance at being when he comes up. Because ultimately, and most people believe this to be true, the reason Jackson Holliday's going down is because of manipulating service time. Because the way MLB contracts work, you have these 6 years of control on a guy before he hits free agency. But naturally, the way contracts work, assuming you get into that 7th year with the control, it's not like it disappears midway through the 7th year. No, it lasts until the end of the 7th year, just naturally the way these contracts work. So if you look at the exact days that Jackson Holliday would have to be up in the majors to guarantee that he doesn't get that extension, or if you want to phrase it the other way, the amount of time that the Orioles need to keep Jackson Holliday in the minors to essentially guarantee that 7th year, it's 16 days. Just over 2 weeks, gang. So there's a real chance by middle to end of April, Jackson Holliday's with the Orioles. Absolutely possible. Now, why do you want to do that, right? We have a lot of money now in the ownership, and we'll talk more about that later, but there have been quotes about how Mike Elias has been reaching out to his agent frequently, almost daily, multiple times, sometimes daily, about trying to get this early extension. Kind of this thing that, a lot of these teams are doing. Now, the Braves have done it. The Royals did it with Witt. A few of these other teams have done it, signing these guys early to big extensions, even before they've made the majors ever, right? So, and giving them a big deal. Unfortunately for us, just like Gunnar Henderson, Jackson Holliday is represented by Scott Boras. And despite the fact that Scott Boras did not have the best looking offseason, I mean, if you look at the guys next winter, Scott Boras isn't going anywhere. His strategy isn't changing. I feel like this happens every few years to Scott Boras, where everyone's like, oh my God, Boras looked horrible. And then for the next 3 winners, he looks amazing, signing these unbelievable contracts when guys hit free agency. And especially a guy of Jackson's age, if you're Scott Boras and you're looking at it, the idea that he could hit free agency between that 26 and let's say 28 years, I mean, that's prime to get this guy this 10, 12-year contract for outrageous money. And who knows what this money's going to look like in 6 to 8 years for these guys. Sky's the limit, it seems like. So ultimately, that's why the Orioles sent him down. And for all Mike Elias and Brandon Hyde want to say about this reason, more seasoning, more at-bats against lefties, strikeout to walk ratio, reps at second base, ultimately the number one factor is that. Now, there's a caveat to that 16 days, though, okay? So it's 16 days in the minors unless you spent more than that and still managed to be top 2 in Rookie of the Year voting, right? So it's kind of this weird game where if the Orioles had him on the beginning of the roster to begin the season and kept them all the way through, the Orioles would get a draft pick compensation for that, Okay? Now, Orioles won't get that when he doesn't start opening day, but they still might get penalized by not getting that 7th year if Jackson performs well enough over the course of his major league season, whenever he gets up, to get top 2 in AL Rookie of the Year voting. In which case, they might not even get the reward by not starting him in the majors, other than the things we talked about, the more seasoning, the more reps, things like that he can get in the minors maybe and be a little more successful at than if they just stuck him in the majors. So if they only wait, let's say 3 weeks, 21 days, and then bring him up to the majors, well then boom. He could very easily wind up top 2 in AL Rookie of the Year voting, considering I believe he's one of the top 2 favorites, and to me, should potentially run away with it if he was up all season. It's very possible that the Orioles still try to get that 7th year and fail. However, okay, this continues with caveats. However, if he wins Rookie of the Year, even after not being on the roster opening day, the Orioles get a draft pick compensation. So it's just one of these kind of funny things, and I think there might be another loophole or two to that rule that I just said. Ultimately, it's chess, not checkers for Mike Elias. Mike Elias is looking long into the future to try and get that 7th year of control before they have to try and negotiate with Jackson Holliday and his agent, Scott Boras. Now, a lot can happen in 7 years. I believe Holliday will be a star by then. I hope maybe he's switched agents, which is possible and does happen. I feel like Boras rarely loses these players, but you never know. And Holliday doesn't have much reason to sign that early extension because money isn't an issue with him and his family. He's got a huge signing bonus from being 1-1. He's getting paid a nice amount every year. And ultimately, his dad was a longtime major league player who seems to probably have done well financially. So it doesn't seem like they're struggling for money like some of these guys who sign these extensions do. And that's not everybody, but that does happen a lot. We hear about that all the time. These teams taking advantage, especially of international guys, by offering them this life-changing amount of money. But ultimately, then in 3-4 years, the team has an unbelievable deal on this player who's now a star. And the player just wanted some degree of security in his life and be able to help out him and his family who maybe are in dire straits financially. So that happens, and that's not Jackson Holliday's situation. So ultimately, is it disappointing, gang? Yes. When I saw the news that he didn't make the team, I was somewhat crushed for a little bit. But so is life. It goes on. Sometimes things are disappointing and they don't turn out exactly how we wanted. I also wanted Adley Rutschman to break camp with the team when he was coming up a couple years ago. Orioles waited a little time and then brought him up. I wanted the same thing for Gunnar Henderson. And I think he broke camp with the team last year as a rookie. But, we wanted Gunnar before that. We wanted Gunnar up earlier. So naturally, and also last season, I was screaming, bring up Cowser, bring up Cowser, bring up Cowser. And then look what happened with Cowser. And we'll get to Colton Cowser, okay? That's the come. But for Jackson Holliday, let's not overreact. I've seen a lot of stuff on Twitter and all over. Orioles getting crushed, talking about this, the move of a poverty team and stuff. That's not us anymore. We're a well-run organization that just so happens to have more talent than maybe anybody in the entire league. So we have the luxury of not starting our top prospect on opening day. We can still get the draft pick compensation if he performs up to it. And if he doesn't, then we get the benefit of that 7th year. And frankly, who knows what could happen? Orioles could make the move in less than 16 days. The Orioles could say, screw it. They could change their mind in a week. There could be an injury. Things happen, right? So there's no guaranteed answer of when Jackson Holliday will be here. Personally, if I was guessing, I'd probably peg about May. I'd say that they let him have at least a month, if not month and a half or so, in the minors for that seasoning, for that experience, for those reps at second, for those at-bats against lefties. It's just, makes sense. But to be shocked if in a couple days into the season, the Orioles make the move? No. And certainly if there's a certain injury or two happen, I could absolutely see that. Now, knock on wood, I hope that doesn't happen. But we're talented enough to get through it if that does be the case. Okay. So, just like Jackson, some other top prospects didn't make this team out of camp. And some really performed well enough, too. Some maybe not so much. And then we'll talk about some veterans that got released because they didn't make the team. And a couple veterans who were designated for assignment that hopefully we can keep, but maybe not. Okay, so to start out with the top prospects, Kobe Mayo, who probably had the second best camp, numbers-wise, I would say, out of anybody, and truly impressed this spring. But we talked many times about how it was a long shot, if anything, for him to make this team out of camp. I didn't really see it to begin camp after he was getting very red hot and continuing that. I thought maybe there's the possibility, especially if Holliday didn't make this team out of camp. Because if you had told me Holliday's not on the team out of camp, I would have then pumped up Kobe Mayo as a real possibility to make this team. Just like Jackson, I think they want to make sure he can get those everyday reps. They don't want to rush it. They don't want to screw up the guy's development. And I don't really think there is screwing up either of these two guys' development. But you don't want to risk it. These are top prospects. And again, the team is too talented to need any of them on the roster opening day. So Kobe Mayo goes back to the minors. So does Kyle Stowers, who lit up camp this year. I think was tied for the league lead in home runs in the Grapefruit League at 7, I believe. Unfortunately, he did pretty much everything he needed to do to make this team and just didn't make it. If Colton Cowser struggled, I think Kyle Stowers makes this roster. Luckily for the Orioles, Stowers has an option. So they send him back to the minors, and truly I believe he will be up at some point this season. He's been too talented of a prospect for them and been succeeding. And after the camp he had, if he continues to go down to the minors and really work, that could be a big one. Now, the thing with Kyle Stowers is, to me, he's one of those top trade candidates. If the Orioles wind up making a move at some point, Kyle Stowers is absolutely the type of prospect that could get moved. Because he's just kind of flanked all over by older guys, by younger guys. Some he's ahead, some he's behind. And he's starting to lose some footing and being that guy that can get brought up when there's the spot open. I still think they really like Kyle Stowers. But if I want to say correctly, I think he's 26 years old already. And there's some worry with some of these prospects like Stowers that you can overstay your welcome in the minors and it starts regressing your talent and your career. You stop elevating when it's not a challenge anymore. Sometimes you start regressing. And that's the worry about Kyle Stowers to me. That's why I think the Orioles will absolutely do everything they can to bring him up next when there's an outfield spot available. And I hope so, because I like Kyle Stowers. He's a big boy, hits some bombs. He plays a good defense, got a great arm. But we'll see. Talk about one of those outfield prospects that has possibly passed him, at least last year, surpassed him, and that was Heston Kjerstad. Now, with his pedigree, it makes sense that Kjerstad kind of jumped Stowers in the pecking order. And he also had a nice little run last year in the bigs, but he didn't have a great camp. almost all of camp I was saying that Heston Kjerstad is not making this team, and I believe that. So, no shock that Heston is back in the minors. But talk about a guy that's knocking on the door again to get back to the majors. I mean, heck, this is a guy that the Orioles liked so much and saw so much in last year that he was on the postseason roster. Even though he didn't get in a game, he was on the team. And he was in the dugout for those losses. So this is a guy the Orioles obviously hold huge. Former 2 overall pick, Heston Kjerstad, will be on this team this year. And can even get some reps at first base, we know. Plays a better outfield than people give him credit for and has shown a lot this spring in that aspect. So there will be injuries. There will be moments where these guys get their chance. And I think that they're ready, but let them get the seasoning in the minors. Because especially a guy like Heston, a guy like Stowers, even maybe a guy like Mayo, are going to struggle for at-bats possibly if they get brought up at the wrong time for this team. Because it's just simply too talented, gang. So they were all moved down to the minors. The 2 veterans that we brought in a couple weeks ago, mid-camp, to push for a roster spot, and they came close, were Kolten Wong and Julio Teheran. Now, out of the 2, I'm more surprised maybe that Teheran didn't make the roster, because it seemed like he pitched really well for them for the most part, at least good enough to give them that long arm. They ultimately went in a different direction. And it's probably best. I didn't necessarily see the Julio Teheran experiment working fully for these Orioles, especially when the 5 guys that made the rotation out of camp had such good springs and showed more than maybe Teheran did because he's aging. He's older. Velocity's lower. It is what it is. Kolten Wong is a shocking one with Jackson Holliday off the roster because the Orioles talked about how they really want a lefty hitting second baseman. And Kolten Wong was one of 2 options other than Jackson Holliday to be that lefty hitting second baseman. And frankly, he played much better than the other one, Nick Mattoon, so who we'll get to in a second. But Kolten Wong, while he didn't have stellar numbers, had a little bit of a vibe to me as far as being successful for the Orioles, even if it was in just a short couple weeks, couple months stretch of the season. And not like the back half and postseason, but like somewhere in the beginning, middle ground. I thought he could have some success and be kind of a cool piece for this team. Ultimately, though, they released both. Neither one made the team, and that's okay. I'm more than happy with that. I would really like to see, because sometimes this happens in these situations, the Orioles re-sign them on that same minor league contract that they just released them on. You know, it's one of these things, hey, especially a veteran like that, we'll do you the courtesy of releasing you and let you try and make it with somebody else. But if you don't, we're still very interested. And the nice part about that is, like, they were just in camp. They know the guys more than maybe some, if not all of these other teams. They know the coaching staff. That's who they were working with, and they might feel comfortable with that and decide, hey, no hard feelings. I want to get back in that organization because I think I can break the roster at some point for them this year. And that's definitely possible. The problem with Wong is we have a lot of infield prospects, and especially if Jackson Holliday is taking basically the reps a second in AAA. I mean, Kolten Wong, we talked about, has versatility and can play other places, so that's possible. Maybe the Orioles, if they bring him back in, decide, let's just get him reps at everywhere but second base, essentially. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if there's really room because, again, it's not just Jackson Holliday. You got a lot of these guys. You got a lot of talented guys in those minors, especially in the infield. So I don't know if the reps are there for minor league reps. Julio Teheran, probably you can find some innings for, I'm sure. But there's a lot of talented arms the Orioles have. I mean, we've talked Povich, we've talked McDermott, you have Armbruster, you have forgetting the Johnson. You got a lot of these talented pitchers in the minors, right? So it's not easy necessarily to find Julio Teheran some time. So I believe most likely they'll move on. But if we could find the room and we can find the innings for them and the at-bats and the situations, I wouldn't mind having them as depth for this team because I think they're both good enough to, again, come up at some point in the season, whether it be very short or a little more extended, and be a contributing factor to a winning baseball team. Now, the two guys that are designated for assignment, and if you don't know what that means, it basically means that we're trying to send them to the minors, but they don't have options anymore. So it's essentially like they're released without being a free agent. Any team can claim them and bring them onto their team. Now, then they have to try and be on the 26-man roster. And oftentimes with these guys, we see them get claimed by another team. That team then instantly designates them. And then it's just kind of this domino effect of trying to keep a guy in the minors. I could see that happening to both Nick Mattoon and Ryan McKenna. Nick Mattoon, I'm not shocked. When we signed him, I didn't think he was making this team. And throughout camp, he did not display enough to make this team. Again, I wouldn't hate having him as minor league depth for a short stint during the season when we need him to come up. But I don't love it. I never loved the Nick Mattoon thing. Ryan McKenna, on the other hand, I was sitting here in front of you guys a lot of times talking about how I thought McKenna was making this roster. I thought having that fifth outfielder was something that the Orioles would absolutely want to have. Now, I also assumed Jackson Holliday would be on the team, thus kind of shoring up the infield and not having as much rotation. It doesn't seem like that was the case. Well, it isn't the case, right? So Ryan McKenna got designated for assignment, and personally, I absolutely think McKenna is good enough to not only get claimed by another team, but make another team. Like, I think there are a lot of really good teams that could use Ryan McKenna. I think we could have used Ryan McKenna. And it's a shame because he had such great clutch numbers, and he was good for us defensively and very versatile, playing all three outfield spots, and a player that I really liked us having. So I'll be upset if we wind up losing him. But that's the nature of the beast, gang. The more talented roster you have, the harder it is. And you got to wind up eventually cutting some guys who maybe could play for damn near any team in the league. Like I said, I don't think Ryan McKenna's a star, but I definitely think he's good enough to be on a roster playing potentially every day. If one of these lower, crappier teams like the A's or somebody like that claims him, he's going to be an everyday player probably for them. And I like Ryan McKenna. I do. I'll miss him if he's gone. That's why I'm really hoping he finds a way to go through waivers and not get claimed. Because I hope Ryan McKenna is a Baltimore Oriole. And I think he'd be a great piece to be able to bring up at some point this season. However, like we talked about, there's a lot of competition for spots and reps. And when a spot does open up, he wouldn't be the only name getting looked at. Heston Kjerstad and Kyle Stowers would also be getting looked at. So that's why I think they decided ultimately that it wasn't worth keeping McKenna. And you got to believe that Mike Elias hit the phones and asked around if anybody was interested in trading for Ryan McKenna. Like truly trading. And clearly that didn't happen. So because that didn't happen, it gives you some hope the Orioles can keep him. But we'll see. We'll see what happens with that. So where's the roster stand? Okay, where does the roster stand now? We have all those guys that we've been talking about back to the minors, released, designated. Where is it? Okay, so again, it's a 26-man roster, okay? So the starting five, no surprises here. Burns, Grayrod, Wells, Kremer, Irvin. The only surprise is that Wells is listed third. You know my love and affinity for Tyler Wells. And this just shows you why I think he's going to be a big piece of this rotation all season. Even when Bradish and Means come back. I think the Orioles are signifying, and his spring showed, that Tyler Wells is a top 5 starter on this roster. And that's not easy to say because there's a lot of good starting prospects and a lot of good major league guys in this rotation. So, bullpen, it was a little iffy who was going to make that last spot, okay? You had 7 spots essentially locked up as of a few days ago to a week ago. Kimbrel, Yanier Cano, Danny Colomb, Cionel Perez, Dylan Tate, Big Mike Bauman, Keegan Aiken. Okay, so you got the 3 lefties in Aiken, Perez, and Colomb. You got the closer in Kimbrel, Cano, Tate, Bauman, all righties. It's a great looking pen. It's a great sounding pen. I think that they're all going to pitch amazing. You still have one more spot because, again, the Orioles wanted to have 13 pitchers. Felt it necessary to have 13 pitchers, even though personally, I thought they'd be better suited, especially earlier in the season, to only have 12. But that's not what they wanted to do. So the 13th guy ended up being Jacob Webb, who we brought in last year, I believe, from the Marlins. Pitched well for us. I enjoyed having Webb out there. He beat out Brian Baker for really that last spot. I guess you could say Teheran, too, for that last bullpen spot. And we'll see. You know, obviously, if you're the last guy making it, you got to perform, or else you're going to start getting taxi squad. And I believe that Webb doesn't have any options left. I think that's how we obtained him last year. So because of that, again, you don't want to designate guys. Guys that have options, like Baker, you can send to the minors and give yourself the flexibility to see how Jacob Webb performs this season. So that's the bullpen. That's the starting rotation. I love it. Truly, I feel like it's the most underrated piece of this Orioles team is the talent that they have in pitching. You know, everyone looks at the bullpen and goes, "Oh, they don't have Batista anymore." Everyone's like, "Oh, well, Bradish isn't in the rotation right now. Oh, they only have Corbin Burns." Like midway through this year, this rotation, even without Bradish and Means, I think is going to be top 10. I think the 3 of Burns, Grayrod, and Wells are going to be scary and a sleeper trio as being one of the best starting trios in the league. And then if you can add Bradish, who comes back to form, and even Means if he can come back to form, well, now you have possibly the scariest starting five in baseball. Like sneaky, scary might not be the most household names all over, but that household names don't necessarily win you everything. Talent wins you. So, I love it. And the bullpen has been very, very good for us the past couple years. So even without Batista, now we're bringing in, a veteran to kind of take that role in Craig Kimbrel. And we talked about how there's always the possibility it gets away from him at some point this year. But starting the season, I love the idea of Kimbrel having a nice year for us. And the idea of bringing Dylan Tate back into this, that talent, I mean, it's scary. It is very, very scary. And listen, the middle of these bullpens can always be a little shaky in baseball. So I think the middle of the Orioles bullpen will be elite as far as compared to other middle bullpens in baseball. But the back end, even without Batista, remains elite. Because truly, I think at least one, if not two of those lefties are going to be great for you in the back end of games. Whether it's Danny Colomb, Cionel Perez, or both of them. I love the idea of one, if not both, being able to come in the 7th or 8th inning and dominate for your lefty. I also love the idea of Yanier Cano continuing his ascension and Dylan Tate being another name that you can throw in the 7th or 8th when you need that righty. I absolutely love it. And don't sleep on Big Mike Bauman. He's like the bullpen equivalent of Tyler Wells to me, even though Tyler Wells could be in the bullpen and Mike Bauman can start. But he's like the poor man Tyler Wells in my eyes. We're like, I love Tyler Wells, but Big Mike Bauman's not far. Just a sleeper name that's stupidly good for these Orioles and continues to take steps forward. So that's the pitching staff as it stands. Now, The final spot, Webb, could change by opening day. We're doing this on Monday. Opening day's Thursday. Technically, rosters don't have to be finalized until that Thursday. Other guys getting designated for assignment. You never know what could happen. The Orioles could find a name or even make a trade. I doubt that. But could find a name designated that they deem more interesting than Jacob Webb. I don't necessarily see that happening. I think they like Webb, and I kind of like Webb. He showed me good enough stuff last year for me to not think he's a liability coming into this season, at the very least. Okay, so let's assume at the moment Jacob Webb got that last bullpen spot. Catchers are cut and dry, Adley and McCann. Easy. Don't even need to go crazy about it. Don't need to talk much about it. Okay, infield. Got the first basemen, Mountie and O'Hearn, Gunnar, Westberg, Mateo, and Urias. So there are the six. You thought Jackson would be that seventh. It's looking like Tyler Nevin is going to be that last spot, roster spot, the 26th guy, and that last reserve position. Plays first, he plays third, he plays corner outfield. Orioles have this like affinity for him. He's like stupidly one of Brandon Hyde's favorites, it feels like. And he had a great spring. So he earned that roster spot also. I know we just touched a drop or two on him in our past episodes because I assumed that Jackson would be up in the majors, which didn't really give Nevin much of a fighting chance to make this roster. The way Mateo and Urias were playing and the way Kowser and Stowers was playing. Like, I didn't think Nevin would make this team, but I was assuming Jackson would be on it. With Jackson off it and it not going to Colton Wong, Tyler Nevin can step in. Now, he doesn't play second base, and we'll touch on kind of the alignments and the players that they'll mix in and out of these positions because there will be this rotation. There will be a lot of versatility going on. But he plays first. He plays third. He was an Oriole for 2 previous seasons. We didn't draft him, but we traded for him from the Rockies when we sent them Michael Givens a few years back. So he's a guy that I think Mike Elias and Brandon Hyde really like for whatever reason. Listen, his dad was Phil Nevin, the old Padre, and a few other teams, I believe. So he has baseball in his blood. I don't know if there's some connection with Hyde or Elias or somebody else with Phil Nevin, his dad. I was going to look into it, but then I was like, let's just assume that he got there strictly for his skill. And again, he showed it this spring. He showed why it's possible. But overall, he's like a 200 hitter in his major league career. It's not great. We got him back from the Tigers. The Tigers took him last year. We got him back this offseason. But it's interesting because, again, he has baseball in his blood. He is a former first-round pick. There's a lot of intrigue to where maybe he figures it out. Maybe he becomes a guy that can be an actual role player on this team. Would it shock me? A little. But listen, we saw a similar thing possibly happen with Ryan O'Hearn last year. If you would have told me Herney would have been this huge piece to the team, I would have been a little shocked. Like, I loved what O'Hearn brought. I loved the idea of O'Hearn when we got him. Didn't really cost us anything. So I liked it. I remember talking with my buddy Joey, who he's big into baseball cards, so he loves the prospects and stuff. And he had been on O'Hearn since the time he was a prospect. So I remember having this conversation before the season about how the Orioles got one of his guys, but truly, I wasn't over the moon about having Ryan O'Hearn like I am now, like I was last year during the season. So maybe Tyler Nevin works out like that. I hope. Either way, he brings it in, and he brings in another right-handed bat, though, for that infield. Right? We talked how the Orioles wanted this lefty second baseman. Well, doesn't really look like they have it. In fact, they don't have it right now, which is okay. You don't have to start the season with your ultimate optimized roster, right? In fact, when you look at, like I said, I wanted 12 pitchers. They insisted they needed 13. Okay. You insist you need, that's one of those things. If you're prioritizing, you need 13 pitchers this season. Okay. So that's something you're prioritizing. You don't have to prioritize a left-handed second baseman on day one. You can wait a little bit for that to filter its way out and you find the right left-handed second baseman for that position. Ultimately, it should be Jackson Holliday, and I believe it will. But again, we don't know the future. We don't know how it all plays out. So just becomes this thing where we don't need to address that want, that need, day one. We don't need to have that in place. So Tyler Nevin becomes that seventh infielder and also kind of fourth outfielder, okay? Or fifth outfielder, excuse me. Because when you look at the outfield, you have the three starters that we've talked a lot about. Hayes, Mullins, Santander. And I love all of them. I love what those three bring. I love the idea that again, can be sneakily great for these Orioles. Get overlooked in how talented they actually have it, right? So, like, if you looked at it, maybe it would be ranked top 10 by a lot of publications. I think it's probably top 5 if they all live up to it and if they all stay healthy. Now, the fourth is going to be Colton Cowser, and he deserves it. Dominated this spring training. Truly. Had a great spring training, and we'll get to that in a second. But we talked about how there is the possibility that one or multiple of those starting outfielders fall flat on their face. And that's when I think that the big blockbuster move, let's just say with Mike Trout, could potentially happen. That's all down the line. I hope they all perform so well that that's not even a thought, not even a consideration. And frankly, I hope Colton Cowser makes that decision even harder on them if one of them do falter, if one of them do get injured, and Cowser comes in and steps up and plays great baseball. I mean, again, like, this is a top prospect. There's no reason to think he won't do that. And I think that he could be a huge piece. Not only can he play all three outfield positions, sparing some guys time, giving them some days off, keeping them healthy, which is a big thing for this outfield especially. So Colton Cowser is going to be a big piece, I think, of this team because, again, he can spare some guys some days, move around, hopefully can keep a hot bat from spring. And he deserved it. He deserved that last roster spot or that fourth outfield reserve spot, that fourth outfielder, however you want to phrase it. He deserved that. Now, did I think they probably should have had 5? Yeah, probably. But it's all right. It's all right. Again, the guys are waiting in the wings whenever we need them. So to dig into Cowser and how he won the job, okay, we know he had a great spring training. His overall lines was 308 batting average, 418 on base, 717 slugging, double, 6 home runs, 13 RBIs, 11 runs. It looks very impressive, right? And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it wasn't impressive. The worry to me is that it started off so hot and didn't really end that hot. If you break down the numbers, his first 10 games, he went 11 for 23, batting average of 478. In the final 8 games, he only went 3 for 23, a batting average of 130, right? So each of those have 23 at-bats. One of them he got 11 hits, the other one he got 3. Also, he had 17 strikeouts in his 48 at-bats. Okay, so it's just one of these things where I'm worried, slightly. Also a little worried because outside of his 6 home runs, he only had 1 extra base hit. Now, you could argue, and I could argue, okay, let's take away some of those home runs, leave him with 3 or 4. odds are then he has a few more extra base hits, a couple more doubles, maybe a triple. Awesome. Now that line looks a little more, not presentable because it's very presentable as it is, but a little more spread out, a little more even. You worry that it's a little outlier-ish. That's what I would say. It seems a little outlier-ish. And for a guy in his 26 games last year that only batted 115, had an on-base of only 286 and a slugging of 148, he had 2 doubles and 4 RBIs. It was not pretty for him, and we know that. Looks like he took that adversity and propelled him into better things. But I can't help but be a little worried at how his spring ended. And some of just the numbers. While there are a lot of good ones out there, if you read between the lines a little, you start going, oh, don't get too excited. Because I don't know. He looks great, but I don't know. Now, he came out and said, listen, I felt, when you're that hot at the plate, and he's far from the first one to say this, you feel like you can hit everything, which leads you to start swinging stuff that you can't hit and that you're not going to get good contact on. And then that gives you this little negative stretch. Now, if this is what he can do every time in, let's say, a 50-bat span, amazing. We don't even need, again, the 6 home runs. Let's change that to 2 and have it be 5 doubles and a triple. Something along those lines, okay? So if we kind of swap out the doubles and home runs and switch those numbers in a 50 at-bat stretch, take the heck out of that. Truly, that's all-star material, potentially, if you continue to do that in each 50 at-bat stretch. It's okay if you go a little hot, little cold, little hot, little cold. Frankly, it's something we're used to. And guys like Santander and Mountcastle and some of these other guys that get really hot and really cold, and you need them to work on that consistency. Hopefully, Cowser can find that consistency and propel himself to a nice major league career. And frankly, this is something I'll touch on in the gambling episode tomorrow, which is coming out. I'm very excited about that. Tomorrow, we have the gambling episode, the Orioles gambling 2024 preview. There's a lot of money, I believe, to be made. Well, one of the ones that in the past couple days I've started to get really excited about is Colton Cowser for Rookie of the Year, that he's still eligible for. Everyone's kind of getting distracted by Jackson Holliday, even if he's not starting the year in the majors. Colton Cowser, with a good start and increased playing opportunity, whether because of an injury or poor performance by some of the other guys, could out of nowhere put up very, very good Rookie of the Year numbers. So just throwing that out there, a little preview for tomorrow's episode. But I've been really enjoying that. So while it sounded maybe like I harped on the negative when it came to Colton Cowser, and maybe I'm the only person right now in America talking negatively about Colton Cowser off of this spring training, again, take it with a grain of salt, because I do see a lot of great. I do see a lot of good stuff. I do think there's so much potential. And personally, I'll have a financial interest in his success this season, if nothing more at that Rookie of the Year bet. Okay? So, next I want to jump ahead a little and talk about the updates on Kyle Bradish and John Means. Okay? Very encouraging, as they have continuously been this spring. Both of them, the quote was that they will most likely, at least it's trending, as though they will both be available early in the first half of the season. Not just in the first half of the season, early in the first half of the season. That's exciting. Your GM's not going to come out and say that if he's not truly excited about both of these men getting back healthy. And we talked that I don't even think John Means has been injured for quite some time. I even think last year when they shut him down for the postseason, that was more precautionary than anything. pushing him back this spring is more precautionary than anything. If anything, pushing him back this spring is completely precautionary. Pulling him from the playoffs last year might have been partially, but now it's completely precautionary. And both of them, early first half of the season. And especially, let's dig in on Kyle Bradish, because for as great as I love John Means, as much as I love John Means, and as great as I think I know he can pitch, and I think he still can pitch for this team, Kyle Bradish is the one that we most recently saw towards the top of the Cy Young last year, right? So that's more of the name, especially age-wise and for this window that we have in the next few years to decade. Kyle Bradish is more of a big piece of it than John Means. So let's focus in on Bradish, because also there were just more quotes. And Elias was talking about, listen, it's still a process. He still has to complete this journey of this recovery, right? We're not there yet. We're not over all the humps. But he has been checking off benchmarks. And that's important. Every benchmark the Orioles have set for him, he's checked off successfully. And you just keep going down the line until hopefully he's back early first half of the season. So remember when we talked the schedule last episode, right? We talked about how those first 36 games were against mediocre opponents mostly. But then after that, it got very intense. Well, how great would it feel getting John Means and Kyle Bradish, or at the very least Kyle Bradish, back, essentially for that stretch, for those stretch of tough games leading to the All-Star break. Over like a month and a half span, the Orioles have a very tough stretch. How great would it feel for us to have this great start against these crappy teams in 36, and towards the back half of that, who knows, maybe one, maybe two starts left for him in that stretch, he comes back and he's able to kind of get in that work. Probably will have a minor league rehab start or two. Get that, come back, have one or two games against those crappy teams before he can help us through that tough stretch. I love hearing it. How could you not love hearing it? Again, Kyle Bradish had a phenomenally great season last year. You add him to this Burns, Grayrod, Wells. I mean, come on. And then, hopefully John Means can come back and be very good too. Wouldn't shock me for John Means to find himself as that third lefty and possibly long guy out of the pen, taking like Keegan Aiken's spot if he falters. Because I really think this starting five, like I talked about earlier, could be stupidly elite, as is, without those two names. You add Kyle Bradish in, yeah, he's guaranteed a spot. That fifth spot, hell, between Wells, Kremer, Irvin, Means, they're all competing. And if Wells is doing great, and Kremer and Irvin are looking good, well, one of them has to drop off for Bradish anyway. So it might be a tough decision on who to drop off. And then when John Means comes back, I mean, listen, Means he might come back before Bradish. I have the gut feeling that probably will be the case. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. Either way, unbelievably encouraging stuff about these Orioles, okay? And Kyle Bradish and John Means' health, which are huge. Huge factors for these Orioles. So, the next thing I want to talk about is the Orioles made kind of a big statement, I would say, about Gunnar Henderson, about how shortstop is his. Okay? They're pretty much, that's your position. They're not looking to move Gunnar around much this season. They said, in emergency situations and games here and there, maybe they might stick him over at third. Just to figure out ways to make it perfect. You know what I mean? To make it all fit, to make it all flow. But they're committing to Gunnar at short, and I love it. I love the commitment because last year he did move around. He bounced from short to third. Heck, if he was just set at one of those, he could have probably won a Gold Glove. So, again, maybe selfishly because I want to see him win a gold glove. But, like, I love the idea that they're just saying, short's yours, take it, kid. And I also think that there's another point to show because Gunnar is that elite prospect, right? We know that. Gunnar is that next level MVP caliber player. Won Rookie of the Year last year against a tough field, truly. And he certainly had a great spring when he came back from that oblique injury and is looking like he's going to hit the ground running in MVP type form and could make a push to be the American League MVP this season, right? Well, keeping him at one position and not making sure his mind isn't worried about where he's going to play or he has to improve on this at this position and this at that position, like those are things that can pull away from that MVP type effort, okay? So we don't have to worry about that. But also it's when you compare it to, let's say, a Jordan Westburg, okay? Another very nice player, very nice prospect, but certainly at least a step, if not 2 or 3, lower than the type of prospect and player Gunnar Henderson is. Okay, the type of X factor that Gunnar Henderson is. So a player like Henderson's caliber, you feel more comfortable about saying, hey, this is your position, you own it. Whereas Jordan Westburg, if it hints some of his growth and development by kind of shifting and altering positions throughout the season, not just throughout his career, I think they're less worried about that. I think that they believe it's not going to take as big of a toll necessarily on Westburg than it would Gunnar. And that's not to say it would take a huge toll on Gunnar. That just is saying how high Gunnar's ceiling is. They don't want to hinder it any. Whereas Westburg has a nice ceiling. I think even a better ceiling than most people believe. But I don't ever see Westburg being in the MVP talk. At least not in the next couple of years. Maybe once he matures and is a 30-year-old or something, who knows. But for the recent future, for the near future, I think they're like, okay, so what? The difference is if Westburg played every day at third as opposed to splitting time at second and third. Okay, what? Maybe it's 5-10 points of batting average. Maybe it's a situation here or there. Maybe it's just a couple, things that aren't 100% perfect for him, but you're not decreasing this major ceiling. And it's also signifying to both those guys, but really everybody, that if you are that elite guy for us, if you are one of those cogs in this core that we're building with, we're prioritizing you. And it might suck for Jordan Westburg at the moment to hear that. Even though I believe that once Jackson Holliday comes up, Westburg will also be most likely set. But until Holliday comes, then how are they looking, right? So assuming Tyler Nevin is on this team, then at second base, you have a rotation of Westburg, Urias, and even Mateo. Now, Mateo hasn't played much second base. He played it for the team he was with previously and hasn't played second base for us in a game since 2021, I believe. But still, he has some experience. I think he played like 14 games at second for us that year. So it's not like he only has a game or two either. So he's certainly a guy that, like I said, has this super utility role I've been talking about. I truly believe, he's listed on their depth chart at second base too. So it's not just me talking out my ass about Jorge Mateo playing second base for this team. I think he will be in that rotation. And depending on the day and depending on the pitcher and depending on whatever guys need off and the whole alignment of everything depends who's going to be at second that day. Because at third, you have two of the same names, Westburg and Urias, but you also have Nevin, right? And Nevin can take reps at first base too and corner outfields. So these guys are going to find time to play. I don't think there's going to be a set everyday guy at second and third for us until Jackson Holliday gets up. Because once he gets up, he's going to be the second baseman. And once he's the second baseman, I believe Westburg is more of that everyday player for these Orioles as far as at-bats and frequent opportunities. So he's going to now take over third. And then Urias and Mateo can take a step back and become more of that role player. But we also talked about the idea that you have to perform in order to keep this position. You have to perform to keep your job. So if out of nowhere, Nevin is having an unbelievable year, right? And maybe one of Urias and Mateo are having a great year. And Westberg's having a great year. But then that other guy who's not having a great year between Urias and Mateo isn't. Out of nowhere, maybe they become expandable, and that's how you bring up Jackson Holliday. So there are a lot of flexibility and options for these Orioles moving forward, and that's the way they like it. That's the way they've built it, and it's a key piece to why they're going to be such a successful team moving forward, no matter what variables come their way. They are setting themselves up for success in many different scenarios, which is really all you can ask for, okay? So, again, I think second and third is going to be a bit of musical chairs to begin the season, at least until Jackson finds his way up on this team. And who knows, those musical chairs might actually play a huge benefit. If Jackson's is struggling down in the minors, and some of the other nice infield prospects are struggling in the minors, then out of nowhere, if all of these guys are performing, we don't need to bring up one of those kids. We can keep this musical chairs of second and third and this constant variable rotation going on all over the place. I actually think it has all of the makings to be immensely successful for these Orioles. And if some guys falter, there are plenty of guys on their heels. I promise you that. There are plenty of guys right on their heels. So, we mentioned this earlier, and it is very sad. No matter how you felt about this person, and loss is always sad, right? I mean, we look at this as an Orioles family. So, even when you disagree with one of your family members, you still have an affinity for them, right? Well, Peter Angelos was kind of that guy that all of us felt a lot of negativity towards during his ownership with the Orioles, and there's good reasons for it. Listen, there were plenty of negatives, but I don't want to touch on that. The man passed away the other day at 94. He's been our owner since 93. And I said this in the first episode, I believe we had, where I said sometimes he caught a bad rap, right? He got called cheap so much, but he did spend some money. Now, he would usually do it wrong. He would usually hire the wrong people who then spent that money poorly. But there were plenty of times when I can pinpoint, hey, he went out and tried. He went out and did this. He went out and did that. So, yeah, were there some negative things in hindsight? Absolutely. Was he kind of a pain in the ass at times for us? 1,000%. But ultimately, I can't help but be a little sad to see Peter Angelos die. You know, did I want him as our owner anymore? No, but listen, once they created that deal with Rubenstein, that basically the caveat was it wouldn't finalize until his death, you knew it was down the road. They're not going to do that for somebody who most likely will be around in 8 to 10 years. They're doing that because they kind of saw the writing on the wall. And it was financially beneficial for them to do it then. So that's why they did it. But it's... Listen, man, it leaves a bad taste in your mouth. It does. And it's also another thing where I'm like, gosh, I'm getting old, man, because I spent 30 years with Peter Angelos owning my Orioles. And now I'm on technically to a third owner in my lifetime, even though I don't remember the one before Angelos, because I was so young. But, you know, life goes on. Life goes on, folks. But it is sad. And I do want to send out my condolences to the Angelos family. And I appreciate everything they have done for us. Because certainly there were years where Peter Angelos could have tried to do something crazy. Could have tried to move the team. I know he threatened it a little, but it was never really possible because it never seemed like he was going to do that. He was a Baltimore native, and I truly believe he had the best intentions with owning the Orioles. Was he cheap sometimes? Yeah. Did he put an inferior product on the team most times? Absolutely. But we also had a couple good runs. And there were times when he tried to make a move. Signed Miguel Tejada and Javi Lopez. Signed Albert Bell. Signed or trade for Sammy Sosa. Signed Chris Davis to this huge deal. Signed Brady Anderson. Kept, if nothing more, stuff like he kept Cal Ripken as an Oriole his whole career. That's the type of thing that the worst owners find ways to sabotage. So I don't want us to just focus on the negatives and call him the worst owner ever and all of these things. I'm not overjoyed to hear of his passing by any means. I'm saddened to hear of his passing. At the same time, life does go on, like I said. So I wanted to touch on that. I'm not going to harp on it too much. I just can't help but be slightly sad because we did lose somebody in the Orioles family. And even though they had agreed to sell the team, listen, he'll still be part of Orioles history. For about 30-something years, he was part of Orioles history, right? So, God rest his soul. Good luck to the Angeloses. Now we just have to hope that everything goes right with this owner's vote on Wednesday. I haven't heard or seen any reason to believe it wouldn't be good and that Rubenstein and this group wouldn't be approved. There's no reason to believe anything bad is coming down the pipeline, but hopefully it votes yes, the sale goes through, and we can look to a beautiful future of Orioles baseball because I think that's what the new ownership is bringing us. I harped on that in an earlier episode, and there's a lot of good days coming for these Orioles. And I appreciate Peter Angelos and his family for everything they did to get us to this point. Man, sometimes you have to go through hell to get to the good stuff. Sometimes you have to crawl through muck for over a decade to see some success. Man, I'm sure he had offers before where he could have sold this team to somebody and making a quick profit. He didn't. He essentially held on to it to the end. Technically did hold on to it till the end. So, yeah. Listen, again, life goes on. I don't want to harp on it too much. Hopefully the owner's vote goes well on this Wednesday. And we have this new ownership group. And there are big days ahead. And they can spend all the money they want keeping this core group together so we can have ourselves an Orioles dynasty on our hands. I hope. I pray. And I think Peter Angelos would want that too. I really do. I think he wants to see the Orioles succeed. And again, I thank him and his family for everything they did, good and bad, that led us to this point and this moment. Because I waited my whole life for this team and this core. And whether it's this season or moving forward, I truly believe this is the core that's going to allow me to see an Orioles World Series championship. I believe it. I believe it in my core. I know it's coming. I think this year. But certainly in the years coming up, I have full confidence that the Orioles are going to be able to get themselves to the top of that mountain. And I've waited my whole life for it. I think about it all the time. In fact, sometimes when I'm just rambling thinking about it, I literally start tearing up. I was joking with a buddy last night about how when the Orioles win the World Series, I will be crying like nobody's ever seen. Like, at least nobody's ever seen me cry. Like, I will be bawling my eyes out like a little baby. Absolutely, uncontrollably sobbing. And if it happens, in my apartment, nobody except maybe one or two people might see it. My dogs will see it. But one of the things I'm actually hoping for and this sounds so stupid, and it is stupid, but like, again, I was talking about this last night, and it was making me crack up laughing, is if I'm at the stadium when they win the World Series, and I'm in a seat that's visible to cameras, there's a very good chance, a very large likelihood, I'm going to wind up as the crying Orioles fan meme. And you're like, what's that? Well, it's not anything yet, but it will be. Because that's how much I'll be sobbing. It will literally become a meme, and I will forever be known as the crying Orioles fan. And I'd love almost nothing more than that. Obviously, at that point, they won the World Series, which is the thing I want really more than anything. I want the Orioles to win this World Series. I want to know what that feels like. I want to see my team win it all. Be the last team standing that season. But the funniest part is, again, I'd be sobbing uncontrollably that if the cameras happen to pick me up, the way the internet works now, the way life works now, I would almost absolutely become a meme. And something that gets tossed around the internet billions of times, and I'd be getting stopped in the street over being the Orioles crying fan, or the crying Orioles fan. And it would kind of make my life. As stupid as that sounds, like, if that's what I get remembered for, I'll take it. Again, I'd have my World Series, and I would absolutely relish and love every second of being known as the sobbing Orioles fan. So I kind of wanted to leave you on some levity, some lightheartedness. You know, we had a lot of great stuff we ran through today, a lot of real important stuff we wanted to talk about. Heck, I didn't even get to everything. I was going to touch on some of these like rankings, whether it's for division or projections that some places have, and they're all outlandish because nobody's projecting the Orioles to win it all, I don't think. Nobody's projecting the Orioles as one of the top 2 teams in the league right now. No, people are usually not even projecting them to win the division or hit their over-win total. It's a bunch of insanity right now in those projections and all of that. And I'm not looking at them and want to talk about them because I think they hold any ground. In fact, quite the opposite. I want to completely discount them with how I believe, what I believe to be true. But I think, listen, we still have a day or two. Tomorrow's the gambling episode. And we're at the point, gang, where I'm going to be doing this every single day. We're going to be sitting down talking Baltimore Orioles baseball every single day. So I want to leave you with some lightheartedness, some fun after we talk Peter Angelos and his passing. And ultimately, I think we had a great episode today. Had a lot of fun doing this. We now basically know what the roster's looking like headed into the season. And season's essentially upon us, guys. The birds are flying north to Baltimore. And we're going to take on the Angels on Thursday. Weather pending. Either way, I will be there. So, very excited, gang. See you tomorrow. But, yeah, had a great time. Enjoyed talking Orioles as always. And, yeah, that's going to wrap it up, gang. So this was yet another episode of the Talkin Orioles Baseball Podcast. Let's go, O's!